Welcome back to the activation phase. Today we're looking into every faction's playstyle in Saga Age of Vikings. This is a general overview over all the factions, and this is supposed to give you a help with figuring out what each faction can do. First up, we have the Vikings. The Vikings are a very melee-focused warband with a very melee-focused battle board, and they can take the very aggressive Berserkers. The Berserkers sacrifice some of their armor to have more attack dice in melee. They are very deadly when they get there, so that's true for the Berserkers and for the whole warband. And they can handle one or two shooting units shooting into them quite okay. Their key abilities are Odin and Valhalla. Odin being the ability that gives exhaustion or exhausts an enemy unit when they shoot at them, which really helps with just single units of levies trying to shoot their bows multiple times per turn, or your opponent's skirmishers, so that would be any javelins, composite bow units trying to get close, shoot, and then run away. They usually can't run away after Odin. And then Valhalla is the ability to sacrifice some of your warriors, or even Hearthguard, but I think it's better on warriors, to gain more attack dice to make the melees that you do get into really count. Some tools and tricks the Vikings have are they very, very good skirmisher trappers. Probably some of the best, maybe only second to Pagan Rus. Because once your opponent activates their composite bow, horses to shoot, and then they try to run away, they will be exhausted. So unless they have a way to dish fatigue, they will stay right there where they are. And then this also, of course, works for javelins. And then they're really, really good at buffing up their melee. So once they get there, they usually die, I think, but they also kill whatever they touch if played correctly. So they can do this to multiple different melees per turn, and that's very effective. Their current strength is low to medium. They sometimes struggle into armies that have multiple shooting units, which is quite common. And then also they struggle defensively. They don't really have that much to save themselves. They usually just end up dying and taking and killing whatever attacked them with them. So it's okay, but they're low to medium. Next up, we have the Anglodanes. They're also a melee-focused warband with a melee-focused battle board, but they have a good mix between aggression and defensive abilities. They can dish out a ton of fatigue if you want to through their abilities. Their key abilities are Shock, which is an ability that lets you charge and your opponent cannot close ranks, which is very important because some battle boards, if they load up, they're quite one or two charges they can eat quite easily without losing much themselves, which is frustrating if you're a melee-focused battle board. And then having this ability to deny closing ranks makes it really easy to wipe a unit or do significant damage, take away the Saga die. It just makes it much more reliable if your opponent can't close ranks. But one downside, of course, if they don't close ranks, they will have lots more of attack dice. So consider this, that they will, if they can't close ranks, they have more attack dice and definitely will hit harder back at you. Another key ability is Lord of War. It just makes your warlord, it enables him to be quite aggressive. If he has a unit of Hearthguard nearby, he can charge multiple times a turn. If your opponent takes the fatigue, even more if you wanted to. But Lord of War, at the end of your turn, whatever you did, just really helps remove all the fatigue he has and make him fresh, harder to kill. And so with Hearthguard nearby, your warlord becomes unkillable. And if your opponent decides he needs to kill the Hearthguard first, that's also no easy task. Tools and tricks they have is Noble Lineage for the rerolls, because if you don't roll a rare, it's quite easy to just use two non-rares to flip one of these dice to a rare, and then use that to re-roll two dice. And the chance that there is a chance that you get a rare out of this because it's two dice rolling. So might as well try, right? There's no downside to it. And then Intimidation really helps in the late game, where if there's not a lot of units left or not a lot of Saga dice, and you know your opponent has no way to activate a non-important unit to take that fatigue that intimidation gives, or the first units if it's a rare. That can be really, really brutal if you put it on here early and then just keep it for later turns. It can really mess with the plan the opponent has. So that's quite powerful if you play it correctly. The overall strength is low to medium, just like Vikings, because there's many warbands that can take fatigue quite easily, and then some of these abilities here that give fatigue are very expensive or have other stipulations that make them less good. And for intimidation, for example, if you play it in the early turns and your opponent sees this, they can just have a dice generator sitting in the back, maneuvering back and forth to always just take the fatigue for the important turns. So that's not really a big deal to where you spend your Saga die, but you don't really get a benefit out of it. Next up are the last Romans. They have a very defensive battle board that helps them survive lots of stuff. They have a lot of good shooting activations, so many abilities to activate the shooting units you need to, and also that's a good multi-activation in there that activates every unit with a bow. And they also have really good activation reactions that help you shape the battle and make your opponent attack the units that you want them to attack. Their key abilities are indirect fire, so that's the ability to shoot through your own ranks, so you can shoot without having line of sight. Unit just has to be within range, so your models have to be within range to shoot. So you can shoot through ruins, or you can shoot through a screen that your opponent maybe has put up, so maybe target the vulnerable Hearthguard behind the screen, which no other army would be able to do like this. And then the other very important ability is protect, because you can use your bow warriors in this way that kind of they're in the middle of the fray and attacking and shooting at the important targets. They sometimes become a target themselves because they're quite weak in melee once you attack them. Of course, they throw lots of dice, but their armor is so low. Protect is the ability to choose a different target than your opponent chose for a charge. So that really helps to keep your bow warriors alive. And this usually you can play around this by only getting into range of the unit that you really want to attack. But even if they do this, that usually costs or gives another fatigue, because that's some more setting up to do. And the last Romans can definitely catch you with protect quite easily. And then the tools and tricks they have defense and protect. So protect is the one for charges we just had, and then defense is the one for shooting. So you can, instead of having your bow warriors being shot, you can make them shoot your normal warriors, or instead of your mounted Hearthguard being shot, just shoot into normal warriors. This can definitely be of great value. And then also Frenzy is a really good defensive ability. If you take a fatigue, but you gain a total of 4 dice, which can really help to kind of decide a battle when you really need it to. So I think that's a great save to help you in these very, very crucial situations. Their current strength right now is probably medium. They're quite tough to play, I think, into and as yourself, because the protect and defense, you can do lots of mind games with these, because they can be quite devastating if you play them correctly, and if you don't, they don't do anything. So they're definitely an interesting warband, but about in the middle. Next up are the Irish. They are a very, very good shooting warband. They have lots of abilities on their battle board that buff their shooting, and that combos super well with being really good in terrain, so they can just hide in terrain and shoot. And they have a great multi-activation too, because the Irish can and want to take lots of levies, and so the multi-activation really helps to get all these levies activated, which is quite hard usually. Next up are the Jomsvikings. They have very high value abilities, so their abilities give you lots, but they usually leave the opponent with the option to cancel the ability and give the Jomsviking player Wrath tokens instead, which they can use on other abilities, and Wrath tokens themselves are very powerful if played with the right abilities. They have a very good multi-activation, which is quite cheap and activates 3 units, and these are just, you can play them as many times per turn as you want, so that's very powerful the Jomsviking player is definitely going to be very fast in feasting and pillaging. He can easily pick up the objectives in turn one, no problem at all. So that's really strong. And then they have additional Saga dice rolls, which is really good as well. So if your opponent does end up giving you Wrath tokens, there's a basic ability on your board that lets you, for every Wrath token you spend, you can basically reroll a Saga die, which basically it keeps you going. It's super strong. Their key abilities are Fury of the Pagans and Pagan Faith. Fury of the Pagans being the multi-activation, that is your basic ability on the top right on your battle board. Very, very strong, and you play that multiple times every game, and usually every turn even. And then also Pagan Faith really helps. It's cheap, and it can give you lots of attack or defense dice or Wrath tokens. So that's really good value. Even if you gain the Wrath tokens, you can definitely spend them on something good later. Tools and tricks that they have. Nordic Tempest can be super annoying, so it's and effective, of course. It's a shot just in your turn, in the Jomsviking player's turn. They can pick any unit on the board, and they can just throw 3 attack dice as a shooting attack at them. So if your opponent thinks of bringing like little dice generators or 4 packs of warriors, 6 pack of levies, the Jomsvikings will love that and just shoot one guy out, and then your die is gone, and you can't really do anything about it. So it doesn't really pay off to bring dice generators into Jomsvikings. And of course, even if your opponent's hiding their Hearthguard on horses, this is very expensive for them to lose Hearthguards on horses just throughout the game, because there's no way to hide. Then there's Song of Steel, which is super good. It's a movement activation, which makes you count as javelins until the end of the turn. So that really helps. It spends your Wrath tokens, and you don't gain fatigue for these movements. It's just if your opponent's denying you Fury of the Pagan, so that's that move at the top right of your board, and you get Wrath tokens for the units, then you can just use Song of Steel with Wrath tokens to move these units with no fatigue even. So if you have that up, then Fury of the Pagans usually doesn't get denied, because it's just the Song of Steel is just better than Fury of the Pagans. And then lastly, punishment. The Jomsviking player can deny 1 activation ability, so any ability that has the activation trigger, which is super powerful, because many of the important abilities that some of the warbands revolve around, they can be cancelled by this, because they have the activation trigger. So if it's like a multi-activation of 3 or more different units, the Jomsviking player can just cancel that thing, and then the opponent has to choose, okay, do I want to do the activation, or do I want to give my opponent, so the Jomsviking player, 4 Wrath tokens with which they can make crazy stuff. So it's a tough one. Turn strength, very strong. They won the German Grand Melee last year. They're very strong. All their abilities are somewhat useful, and some of them are really, really good. The Wrath token mechanic is, you don't quite understand how good Wrath tokens are until you see a Jomsviking player having them and being able to spend them and just wrecking shit without losing anything themselves. They're quite powerful. Next up are the Anglo-Saxons. They use very big units, so quite different to the Jomsvikings. They need lots of levies to work, and they can make big squads of warriors work. Their key abilities are Call to Arms and Crash of Shields. Call to Arms being the ability that costs a rare, and Zora's ability being the ability to make your levies count as if they were warriors for their melee aggression. So your 12 stacks of levies with no equipment will throw 12 attacks instead of 6. So if you think of maybe having 3 or 4 points of these levies suddenly doubling their attacks from the get-go, that's really, really powerful. And then Crash of Shields, of course, helps you kind of keep your figures alive. Your opponent must discard attack dice equal to half the number of figures in a unit, and that's obviously very good with levies or big blocks of warriors. So if your opponent needs to discard 6 attacks into your warriors, then they're not going to be left with much, and so that's very powerful. Tools and tricks that they have is they have the Valiant Hearts, so that helps to increase their size for their abilities, because even their basic activations depend on sizes of your units. So small units are quite tough to activate with this, and some of the abilities don't really work on this, and so Valiant Hearts is very, very good to get your units back over the threshold of some abilities need 10, so that's an important threshold to keep in mind. And then, of course, the truce, so that's remove a fatigue from each of units containing 10 or more figures. It's really good. You can do it in your opponent's orders phase or in your orders phase. It just helps to freshen up your guys, and even if they're after they've fought in your opponent's orders phase, freshen them up, or before you want to play yourself, just freshen them up. Really powerful. It's just an uncommon. You can easily remove 4 or 5 fatigues with this. Quite good. Their current strength, medium to strong. They won the Polish Grand Melee last year with some mercenaries, so Gagadil and the Fanatical Pilgrims. But their strength really depends on being able to get a rare in the turns that you need them. On average, the expected result is with like 6 or 7 dice, of course, that you get a rare, but many times it can happen that you don't get it, and that's gonna be difficult on these turns. Next up are the Norse Gaels. They are a very, very strong melee army. They throw lots of attacks, sometimes low quality attacks, sometimes high quality attacks. They're very, very good in melee. They're quite good with mercenaries because their abilities give you combat bonus dice, and these, of course, because they're a basic ability, they work with your mercenaries, so that's really good, and you can buff shooting or melee of mercenaries that you would usually not do that with because it's expensive. Like, other warbands don't really put 6 dice into their combat pool. They have no shooting defense, so if they are facing the Irish or any other very good shooting army, they struggle a lot, and so they need to use terrain, which makes them slower, of course, and being slow is kind of tough for a melee army. Their key abilities are Clenched Fists and Expandable. Clenched Fists being a simple way to generate more attacks, put dice into your combat pool, which the whole Norse Gaels revolve around. So the abilities usually take dice out of the combat pool or put dice into the combat pool. It's just a different way to interact with the combat pool than other combat bonus than other factions do. And then Expandable is a very good ability which lets you, so it's an orders ability which lets you dish the fatigue that your unit generates onto your levy units, so your warriors can double charge or double move, and then the fatigue they would take on the second move can just be put onto a small levy unit, and the warriors are still fresh and can charge. Tools and tricks that they have, they're very good with spilled blood. So it's for every model that dies in a melee, a die will be put into the combat bonus, which is super good because that can easily be your full 8 Saga dice, no problem if you do it on the last melee of the turn. Your turn doing this, playing this really helps to fill up that combat bonus quite quickly. And it also enables other abilities like Norse, because that Norse takes dice out of the combat bonus to give different effects, and so Norse can generate auto attacks with your combat bonus. So having dice in your combat bonus is super important. Their current strength is probably about medium, maybe slightly low. They really struggle with not being able to take shooting at all. So if you're facing a melee army, these guys can definitely do some work, and they will die in the process, but usually they die a little bit slower than their opponent. So that's quite strong, but as soon as they start facing a army that can shoot even a little bit, they have a problem because there's literally no shooting reaction on the board. Not even their combat bonus has the shooting reaction trigger, so it's tough. Next up are the Scots. They are a very, very defensive warband, so defensive in shooting or in melee. They have the potential to shoot a lot if you want to, and that can be quite strong, especially into the Norse Gaels or any warband that can't really handle the shooting well, so the potential to have it is very important. And their Their ability to combo their Battleboard advanced Saga abilities is incredible. So you can play 2 or 3 abilities just stacked up behind each other and have great amounts of defense and attack dice, or super good comboed abilities. They're really good. Their key abilities are Hold at Bay. So Hold at Bay is it just gives you 3 defense dice very cheaply, and you can do that easily in your opponent's turn through no respite. So that's basically you in the start of your opponent's turn, you can reroll 3 more dice and then put them on your battle board. And so if you played Hold at Bay at your turn, you can just play it again in your opponent's turn. So that really helps to keep your guys alive. 3 defense dice for a common, always nice, and that's in shooting or in melee. And then counterattack is the ability to gain 2 attack dice for each defense die you currently have. So these 3 defense die you just gained through Hold at Bay suddenly can turn into 6 attacks, and there's definitely lots of other ways to give you more defense dice. So if you have 10 defense dice, you can easily generate 20 attack dice with a counterattack if your unit can throw 20 more attacks. Tools and tricks that they have Reach, which is their shooting ability. So every unit not equipped with a ranged weapon can now shoot fatigue free, because they count as being javelins for that shooting attack. It's good. It's fatigue free. It can be lots of shots. If you have your warband, your warlord, and your warband kind of like centered around or just close to the opposing army, then this can easily be like 20 plus shots, which is always really good, and it's you don't really put yourself at risk. And then Stand Together is a nice trick to charge a unit that is hiding in a ruin or in rocky ground, so a unit that has solid cover. Because when you charge them, you count as being the defender, so they can, an attacking unit, so that would be your opponent, even though you charged, they are the attacking unit. So they can never gain the bonus from the terrain they're in, but you can. If you can fully put your guys into the terrain, you're suddenly the defender, and you get the terrain bonus, so that makes you very powerful in that instance. Very good. Their current strength is about medium. They can handle most warbands quite well. They have lots of defense dice. Sometimes if the combos start breaking apart, they get a little bit weakened and can't really finish the job. So I think you kind of have to think this through, and so they're about medium. Next up are the Pagan Rus. They are a very defensive warband that really gets helped a lot by their battle boards and abilities to kind of slow the game down, so they can stop your opponents in their tracks or give them fatigue. So you spend dice on making your opponent less active in their own turns. They have the potential to be very tactical. There's lots of abilities that help you in melee, and you need to really consider what you want to do with them. They can increase and decrease armor, and do some fun combos with that. Their key abilities are Biting Cold and Frozen Wind. So Biting Cold, after one of your opponent's units, after the activation ends, that is not a rest, you can stop them cold in their tracks, so they cannot be activated again this turn. So that would be very, very good against any skirmisher type warbands. So the horses with javelins or composite bows, or any unit, you can deny a very big charge that your opponent set up, and it's just, if your opponent plays big units, having this Biting Cold to freeze them really hurts. And then Frozen Wind is just a way to dish mass fatigue if you play it right. Your opponent kind of has to spread out to avoid being hit by Frozen Wind and taking like 3 or 4 fatigues per turn. So that's really powerful and expensive to play, because it's Frozen Wind takes 2 dice. Tools and tricks that they have would be Wrath of the East. So that's the ability that combos super well with the rest of your board. It's just every time you change your value for armor gets decreased or increased, you gain additional defense and attack dice, and so some of your abilities do that. So that's very, very strong. You suddenly, for an ability that takes a common, you end up getting like 7 attack dice, and that's very, very strong. And then Blizzard is an order's reaction, and you can make one of your units count as being surrounded by uneven terrain. So any mounted warband definitely doesn't want to come near anymore, and it also just slows any attacker down. So in combination with biting cold, so stopping unit dead in their tracks, makes these guys very hard to fight. And when you get into melee with them, you kind of don't want to be. So yeah, they're a tough warband to play into, and very defensive. Their current strength is medium, maybe slightly strong. The problem is they spend so many dice on not making your opponent, like on disabling your opponent's turn, that they don't really get to do much stuff themselves, which is tough in a game, in like objective games where you need to actually attack important markers or get somewhere to pick something up. So they're about medium. Next up are the Carolingians. They are a warband that can shoot a lot without taking fatigue, and they can move a lot without taking fatigue. They have very, very good multi-activations, and they also get stronger the longer the game lasts. So they accumulate dice on their battle board, which enables their other abilities. So the longer the game lasts, having these dice up there, your abilities will be super strong, but your opponent won't have that many dice to be that strong as well. So the longer the game lasts, the stronger the Carolingians will be. The key abilities being Ardor or Illusio, and Ardor is your way to mass activate units without fatigue, to move or shoot, so that's very good. And then Illusio helps you with charging without fatigue, which is also really good. This works best on Hearthguard because your unit size has to be quite small for this to work. So Illusio, great mass activation, and Ardor is just a very good charge with no fatigue. That's always good. And if you consider that your Hearthguard can be on horse, and Ardor can move them without a fatigue, and Illusio can charge them without a fatigue, they can get like 36 inches of charge without taking a fatigue. So that's really, really good. You basically cannot hide on the whole table from them, which is super powerful, of course. Tools and tricks that they have is their Perilium. So that's at the top right of the battle board. They gather their dice, and these dice enable the other abilities to work. And so once you have lots of dice in there, the other abilities will end up super strong. And then a neat trick they can pull off is Fortis and Dominate. So Fortis costs a rare, and it takes 3 attack dice from your opponent and gives you 3. That also works with defense, but that's quite hard to pull off. So yeah, 3 attack dice. And then Dominate enables you to basically play any melee shooting or shooting reaction ability again, even though you have already played it. So you could do this again. So in total, you can easily take 6 of your attack dice from your opponent and just gain 6 yourself. So for example, if you do Warlord and Warlord, you suddenly have 14 attacks and your opponent has 2. So yeah, I'm sure they won't enjoy that. Their current strength, they are strong. They have the activations with no fatigue, the levies with their javelins. They make them very strong. Lots of shooting if you wanted to, and then also very good melee capabilities if you want them to. The only thing that holds them back from being very, very strong is the dice that you gather at the top right of your battle board. You don't have them available to do activations with them, so you usually play your turns with 5 dice, which sometimes can be not enough. So that can hold them back. Next up are the Welsh. They are a very reactive warband that activates a lot in your opponent's turn. They're quick, deadly, and die easily. They shoot a lot, and they're quite killy on the charge because of their javelins. They can be good on foot if you put your warriors with javelins on foot. Their key abilities are Our Land and Evade. So these 2 abilities are just activation reactions that let you run away in your opponent's turn or even charge in your opponent's turn to have maximum efficiency with your javelins, because they get the +1 to their attack dice when they are charging. Tools and tricks to keep in mind with them. They have Children of the Land and the Horsemen. Children of the Land being, if you put your warriors on foot, this can really help because your warriors will not reduce their movement through uneven or dangerous terrain. And the Horsemen activates all of your mounted units, and each of these units may activate to move or charge. So you have a very good mass activation for either for your horses, or you have a very good ability to move the terrain and get all the bonuses without being slowed down for your infantry. So I think you take one of these two routes. You either go mass infantry with javelins or mass horses with javelins to gain maximum bonus out of these abilities here. Their current strength, they're strong. There's some warbands that completely pick them apart, but there's only like 2 of these. Like the Vikings can if they're lucky, and then the Pagan Rus definitely are hard to battle with these Welsh. But yeah, the Welsh themselves very strong, do lots of stuff, and their shooting and being able to shoot that many shots, many warbands can't really take that. So next up and lastly are the Normans. They are a very fast warband, and they activate in your opponent's turn, but not as much as the Welsh do. They are very deadly on the charge because of bonus dice and additional attack dice, and being able to kind of over fatigue your units to be super strong for that one melee. And they have these super long range bow shots, so their levies with bows can shoot 2L instead of just 1L. So for the key abilities, that would be Volley Fire and Pursuit. Volley Fire being the ability that activates a unit of levies with your bows to shoot the super long distance shot. It's hard to hide from that. They usually can target something, so that's an ability you can basically play every turn. And then next would be Pursuit. That's a charge that doesn't generate fatigue and gives you bonus dice. That's really good on your Hearthguard or on your warriors, just to gain these bonus dice to make the other abilities work on your board. Tools and tricks that you have is Gallop, so that's an ability that lets you run away in your opponent's turn, quite good. And then Charge, that's an ability that lets you kind of over fatigue one of your units. So if you have a unit that you think is going to die anyway, you can just give it an additional fatigue after the melee, and you get lots of extra dice. So that's super good on small warrior units that charge with Pursuit, because if it's like 3 warriors, then they get 3 bonus dice from Pursuit, and they can double that again through Charge and other abilities on here. So very powerful. Their current strength, being able to shoot so well and being able to charge so well, makes them quite strong. They can sometimes struggle with being able to get units out of terrain, but you technically do have the option to put your Norman warriors on foot, even though people don't really do that. So that was the overview over the Age of Vikings factions. We hope that helped and kind of helped you decide which faction you want to play. And tune in for the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.